When the fire starts to glow, hidden stories start to grow. Take a breath, stay a while. Every mystery leaves a trail. Welcome to Paranormal Stories and Coffee.
Welcome back to Paranormal Stories and Coffee. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, I have 5 stories to share with you. Stories that have been passed down through families, shared around campfires, whispered between friends, or told to me over the years. Whether they're folklore, local legends, or something much harder to explain, I'll let you decide. So pour yourself a cup, get comfortable, and let's step into the unknown together. Because tonight, the fire isn't the only thing keeping us company. The first story tonight was shared with me by a retired forestry worker from western North Carolina. He spent nearly 30 years working deep in the Appalachian Mountains. During that time, he heard plenty of stories from hunters and campers. But he told me there was one story that always bothered him, because every person who told it described the same thing: the footsteps. It was the first weekend of October, the kind of weekend campers dream about. The summer heat had finally faded. The leaves had just begun turning shades of amber, crimson, and gold. 4 lifelong friends packed their truck and headed into the mountains for one last camping trip before winter. By late afternoon, they found a quiet clearing beside a small lake. The water reflected the orange glow of the setting sun. Towering pine trees surrounded the campsite, their branches swaying gently in the cool breeze. It was peaceful, the kind of place where the outside world simply disappeared. They pitched their tents, built a fire, cooked hot dogs over the flames, laughed until well after dark. Eventually, the fire burned low. One by one, they crawled into their sleeping bags. Sometime after midnight, Jake woke up. At first, he wasn't sure why. He listened. Nothing. Then, crunch. A single footstep, somewhere outside the tent. He smiled to himself. Probably a deer, maybe a raccoon. He rolled over, closed his eyes. Then, crunch. Another step. This one, closer. He glanced toward his friend sleeping beside him, still asleep. Another minute passed. Crunch. Jake frowned. There was something strange about it. The footsteps weren't walking, they were stopping. Every single step ended right beside the tent. Then, another step. Another side. Then, silence. Jake quietly whispered, "Ryan." His friend stirred. "Do you hear that?" Before Ryan could answer, crunch. Another footstep. Ryan sat upright. The 2 of them listened. The sound came again. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. One step, wait. One step, wait. Jake whispered, "It's walking around us." Ryan shook his head. He'd been counting. "No," he whispered. "It's stopping." Silence. Then, crunch. Directly outside Ryan's side of the tent. They both held their breath. Another long pause. Then, crunch. Jake sighed. Ryan whispered, "It's checking." Neither of them spoke again. For the next 2 hours, the footsteps never hurried, never circled, never wandered away. One heavy step, silence. Another heavy step, silence. Always moving from one side of the tent to another, as though something outside was making sure exactly where each person was sleeping. At one point, the footsteps stopped altogether. Jake thought it was finally over. Then, The fabric above his head slowly bent inward. Not much, just enough to suggest something incredibly heavy had leaned against the tent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Several long seconds passed. Then the pressure disappeared. The footsteps continued. Just before sunrise, the forest came alive again. Birds began singing. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The footsteps stopped completely. The four friends waited until daylight before stepping outside. The campsite looked perfectly normal. Nothing had been disturbed. The cooler sat exactly where they'd left it. The fire had burned down to cold ash. Then Ryan noticed the ground. One enormous footprint, just outside the tent. Jake found another, one beside each corner. Only 4. No trail leading toward them, no trail leading away. Just 4 massive footprints, perfectly placed, as though whatever had visited had stood beside each camper, one at a time. The forestry worker took a long sip of his coffee before finishing the story. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone remembering a campfire tale. It was the smile of someone remembering something that had never made sense. He quietly said, "People always ask me if they were bear tracks." He looked out the window for a moment, then shook his head. "I've spent my whole life tracking bears. Bears don't stop beside every sleeping person." Old campers say, if something walks around your tent all night, be thankful it never tried to come inside. The next story was shared with me by a father from northern Louisiana. He told me this happened nearly 20 years ago while camping with his 12-year-old daughter. He smiled as he remembered the trip, but when he reached the end of the story, that smile disappeared. He simply said, "It was the last time we ever camped." The campground sat beside a slow-moving river, hidden deep within the pine forests. It wasn't one of those crowded campgrounds with RVs and electric hookups. This was the kind of place where you had to hike the last mile carrying your gear. No lights, no cell service, no sounds except the river, the wind, and the forest. As the sun slipped below the trees, the temperature dropped just enough to make the campfire feel comforting. The father gathered a few extra logs while his daughter carefully roasted marshmallows over the flames. The sweet smell of melting sugar mixed with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. They laughed, talked about school, made plans for the next morning's hike. It was one of those evenings that felt perfect. The father would later say, "That's what bothered me the most. Nothing felt wrong, until it did." The fire had burned down into glowing orange coals. The woods beyond the campsite had become nothing but darkness. The daughter stopped talking. She stared into the trees, long enough that her father noticed. He smiled. "What is it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she quietly asked, "Dad, who's walking around our camp?" He laughed. "Nobody. Probably a deer, maybe a raccoon." She kept staring, then softly said, "No, they're staying just outside the light." The father stood, flashlight in hand. He slowly swept the beam across the trees. Nothing, just tall pines disappearing into darkness. He chuckled. "See?" His daughter wasn't smiling. She hadn't taken her eyes off the woods. As he sat back down, a faint smell drifted through the campsite. Not smoke, not damp leaves, something old, like wet fur left out in the rain. The father wrinkled his nose. "Do you smell that?" His daughter nodded. "It came when they did." The father looked at her. "Who?" she whispered. "The ones walking." The flames suddenly flickered, not because of the wind. There wasn't any. The light seemed to pulse, bright, dark, almost as though something kept passing between the fire and the trees. The father leaned forward, watching. Every few seconds, the firelight dimmed, then returned, dimmed, then returned. His daughter quietly reached for his hand. "Dad, why won't they come closer?" The father swallowed. Because he had just realized something. Whatever was moving never entered the firelight. It simply circled, patiently. He quickly threw another log onto the fire. The flames leapt higher. For less than a second, he saw it. Not clearly, just enough. A shape, much taller than any man, too thin. Its arms seemed too long. It disappeared before his mind could understand what he'd seen. His daughter whispered, "Dad." He didn't answer. She squeezed his hand tighter. "I don't think it's walking." He slowly looked at her. Her eyes never left the darkness. "I think it's crawling." The father never looked back toward the trees again. Instead, he fed the fire, again and again and again. Neither of them slept. Every time the fire burned low, he added another log. He wasn't trying to stay warm anymore. He was trying to keep the darkness away. When dawn finally broke, birdsong returned. The river sounded normal again. The strange smell had disappeared. The father stepped outside the tent. Everything looked exactly as they had left it, until he noticed the stack of firewood. Every log they'd collected the night before had been moved. Someone, or something, had carefully arranged them into a perfect circle around the tent. Not one log was missing. Not one was out of place. It looked intentional. The father took a sip of his coffee before finishing the story. He looked into the flames for a long time, then quietly said, "People always ask why I stayed awake feeding that fire." He smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "I wasn't trying to keep us warm. I was making sure the fire stayed between us." Some campers believe a fire keeps you warm. Others believe it keeps something else away. The next story was shared with me by an elderly couple from eastern Tennessee. They had spent almost 40 years exploring the Appalachian Mountains together. They had camped through thunderstorms, black bear encounters, and nights so cold they woke to frost on their tents. But when I asked them what had frightened them the most, they didn't talk about an animal. They talked about a man who appeared where no one should have been. It was late September. The mountains were beginning to trade their summer greens for deep oranges and crimson reds. The couple had hiked nearly 6 miles into the backcountry, following a narrow trail that wound through towering hemlocks and ancient oaks. They chose a campsite beside a quiet stream. As darkness settled over the forest, they built a small fire. The smell of burning oak drifted through the cool night air. The woman poured fresh coffee into 2 metal camping mugs, while her husband stirred the coals with a long stick. Above them, the sky was overflowing with stars. No traffic, no voices, no distant lights. Only the gentle crackle of the fire and the rhythmic sound of water flowing over smooth stones. The husband smiled. "I don't think there's another soul for miles." His wife wrapped both hands around her mug. "That's exactly why I love it out here." They had almost finished their coffee when a calm voice drifted out of the darkness. "Good evening." Neither of them had heard footsteps. Neither had heard branches snapping. Just a voice. The husband quickly stood. At the very edge of the firelight stood a tall man. He wore a long black coat despite the mild weather. A dark hat shaded most of his face. One hand rested on the handle of an old leather suitcase. The other hung calmly at his side. His clothes were immaculate. Not a speck of mud, not a leaf, not a wrinkle. Odd, for someone who had supposedly been hiking through miles of forest. He smiled politely. "Forgive me for disturbing you." His voice was soft, almost musical. "I've been walking for quite some time." He glanced toward the fire. "Would you mind if I warmed myself for a few minutes?" The husband immediately answered, "Of course." Before he could say another word, his wife quietly reached over and grabbed his wrist. Not hard, just enough. He looked at her. She barely shook her head. Something inside her didn't feel right. She couldn't explain it. The stranger continued smiling, patient, relaxed, almost as though he already knew exactly how the conversation would unfold. The husband noticed something strange, the man's breathing, or rather, the lack of it. After hiking through mountains, his chest never rose, never fell. He simply stood there, perfectly still. Trying to ease the awkward silence, the husband held up the coffee pot. "Can I at least pour you a cup?" The stranger smiled warmly. "That's very kind." Long pause. "But I'd rather come closer." His wife immediately answered, "The coffee's still hot. I'll bring it to you." For the first time, the smile seemed to fade, only slightly. He lowered his eyes, then looked back up. "No." Another long pause. "I'd rather you invited me." The woods became impossibly quiet. The stream still flowed, the fire still crackled, but every insect, every frog, every owl had gone silent. The husband slowly reached for the old metal coffee pot. As he lifted it, the polished surface caught the firelight. For just a moment, he saw his own reflection, his wife's reflection, the flames, the trees. He instinctively turned the pot slightly toward the stranger. Nothing. Only darkness where the man should have been. Before he could look again, the stranger gently spoke. "Is something wrong?" The husband quickly lowered the pot. His heart began pounding. The wife finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. You can't come any closer." The stranger studied both of them for several seconds. Then he smiled, tipped his hat. A wise decision. He turned and disappeared into the darkness beyond the trees. Not hurried, not angry, simply gone. Neither of them slept. Every few minutes, the husband added another log to the fire. Neither mentioned why. At sunrise, they packed their campsite in silence. As they prepared to leave, the husband noticed footprints in the damp soil, a perfect trail leading toward the campsite. He followed them, one after another, until they stopped, exactly where the stranger had been standing. There were no footprints leading away, only untouched earth. Years later, the husband still remembered one detail more clearly than anything else. He looked at me over his coffee cup and quietly said, "He never once asked for help. He only asked to be invited." This next story was shared with me by a former park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. During his career, he responded to hundreds of missing hiker reports. Most people were found within a day. Some took a little longer, and a few were only found because they stopped following the light. 3 college friends decided to spend their fall break backpacking through the Smoky Mountains. The weather forecast was perfect. Cool evenings and clear skies. They spent the afternoon hiking through valleys covered in brilliant shades of orange and gold. By sunset, they found a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. The fire crackled. Instant noodles, coffee, stories, laughter echoed through the trees. One of them joked, "If horror movies have taught us anything," another laughed, "it's that nobody leaves the fire after dark." The third smiled, "Good thing we're smarter than horror movie characters." Around 11 that night, the fire began burning low. One friend stood up. "I'll grab more wood." Another grabbed a flashlight. "I'll come with you." The third stayed behind. "Don't go far." The flashlight beam disappeared between the trees. Within seconds, the campsite felt much quieter. The 2 friends continued gathering fallen branches. The beam from their flashlight cut through the darkness, catching patches of white fog drifting silently between the trees. The air had changed. The forest no longer smelled of pine. Instead, it carried the scent of damp moss and something strangely sweet, like old wildflowers left too long in water. One friend stopped. "Do you hear that?" The other listened. At first, nothing. Then, very faintly, ting! Silence. Several seconds later, ting! Ting! Like tiny metal bells far away. Not loud enough to tell where they were coming from. The sound drifted through the trees, almost carried by the fog itself. The bells stopped. Complete silence. No insects, no frogs, no wind. Then, a single woman's voice, not speaking or singing, simply humming, softly. It echoed through the forest, as though it came from everywhere at once. One friend whispered, "Please tell me you hear that." The other nodded without taking his eyes off the darkness. Then the humming stopped, and a warm golden light appeared between the trees. The lantern floated gently through the fog, not swinging the way a lantern should. It glided, smoothly, without a sound. As they stepped closer, the outline of an elderly woman slowly emerged behind it. Long gray dress, thin hands, her back facing them, her head slightly lowered. She stood perfectly still. The lantern continued its slow, gentle sway, yet the woman never moved. Not even her clothing stirred. One friend called out, "Ma'am?" Nothing. One of them took another cautious step. The bells returned, this time closer. Ting, ting, ting. But now they noticed something impossible. The bells weren't coming from the woods. They were coming from the woman. Tiny bells, somewhere beneath her dress, ringing softly even though she hadn't moved. The humming began again, only now it sounded sad, like someone mourning. The sound made both campers feel something neither could explain. Not fear, an overwhelming urge to walk toward her. The lantern slowly began rising. The woman remained perfectly still, higher, until the lantern floated well above the treetops. Its warm glow illuminated the fog. One friend whispered, "How is she doing that?" The other never answered. The humming had stopped, and for the first time they realized the woman was no longer standing where she'd been. She was closer, still facing away, still motionless. Neither of them had seen her move. Without warning, a long, low wail drifted through the forest. Not human nor animal, it sounded ancient, the kind of sound that made every hair on their bodies stand on end. The bells suddenly stopped. The lantern went dark. The woods disappeared into complete blackness. One friend grabbed the other's arm. "Run!" Branches whipped across their faces as they ran. The wailing never got louder. It simply followed, always the same distance behind them. The bells returned one last time. Ting! Right behind them. Neither looked back. Neither ever would. The next morning, the park ranger listened quietly, then asked, "Did she ever turn around?" "No." The ranger nodded. "Good." One camper asked, "Who was she?" The ranger looked toward the woods, then quietly answered, "Some people call her a spirit. The old-timers around here simply call her the one who wants you to follow. Not every light is meant to guide you. Some are meant to see if you'll come closer." The last story tonight was shared with me by a retired search and rescue volunteer from the Appalachian Mountains. He spent over 20 years searching for lost hikers. When I asked him what the strangest thing he'd ever encountered was, he didn't tell me about someone who disappeared. He told me about the people who came back. 5 friends sat around their campfire just after midnight. The flames danced lazily. Coffee simmered in a black kettle. Someone was telling ghost stories. Someone else laughed. One friend teased, "We're all going to scare ourselves so badly nobody's sleeping tonight." Everyone laughed. The fire popped. An owl called somewhere in the distance. It was perfect. One of the friends stopped laughing. He stared into the trees. "Guys?" Nobody answered. He pointed. Far beyond their campsite, another fire. Small, orange, flickering gently. Someone smiled. "Guess we're not alone." Another frowned. "That's weird." They had hiked nearly 8 miles. The ranger had told them they were completely alone. Then they heard laughter, soft and almost cheerful. Someone called out, "Evening!" The voice sounded friendly. Another voice laughed. Then another. The sounds drifted through the trees as though another group of campers was enjoying their own night. One friend smiled. "Maybe we should say hi." Another stood. "They've got a bigger fire than we do." As one of them started walking, the oldest member of the group quietly said, "Stop." Nobody understood why. He simply stared, watching, then whispered, "Count them." Everyone looked. Silhouettes moved around the second fire. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But the laughter only sounded like 4 people. One voice called again, "Come join us." Another, "We've got coffee." Then, a woman's voice, soft, almost familiar. One camper frowned. "Mom?" Everyone turned. His mother had died years earlier. The voice came again, exactly the same. "Honey." He took one step toward the trees, then another. The oldest camper tackled him, hard. The instant he hit the ground, every voice stopped. The second campfire went out. Complete darkness. Nobody slept. When dawn finally came, they searched the place where the second fire had burned. Nothing. No ashes, no burnt wood, no footprints, no fire ring, only untouched leaves, as if no one had ever been there. On the hike back, they told the park ranger everything. He listened quietly, never interrupted. When they finished, he sighed, then said, "Every few years, somebody follows that fire." One camper asked, "Who are they?" The ranger shook his head. "We don't know." Long pause. "But the ones who come back," another pause, "never remember walking into the woods." Before leaving, the ranger gave them one final piece of advice. "If you ever hear someone you love calling your name," he looked toward the trees, "make sure you can still see them." Not every fire offers warmth, not every voice wants to help, and sometimes the thing calling your name already knows it. Tonight, you heard 5 old campfire rules. Maybe they're only stories, maybe they're warnings. Either way, if you ever find yourself alone beneath the trees, I hope you remember them. Thank you for joining me for another evening of paranormal stories and coffee. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what legends, mysteries, or folklore you'd like to hear next. Until next time, keep the coffee warm, stay curious, and whatever you do, don't follow the lights. Good night.